Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The January chill enveloped the city like a blanket of ice. Snow fell heavily, covering the sidewalks with a thick layer. At the bus stop, under a flickering lamppost, a young man waited, his hands deep in his holey pockets. Mark Delcourt didn't have much in life: a small, barely heated studio apartment, a few savings that were melting away like snow under his shoes, and above all, an uncertain future since he had lost his job 2 months earlier. But despite the harshness of his daily life, he had retained one precious thing: his humanity. That evening, a woman stood beside him. She wore a thin, elegant evening dress, completely unsuitable for the blizzard. Her bare arms trembled, her lips were blue with cold, and her eyes stared impatiently at the road. Clearly, she hadn't planned on staying out so long. Seeing her huddle, Mark felt a pang in his heart. He too was cold, terribly cold. His old, threadbare jacket was all that protected him from the biting wind. Yet, without thinking twice, he took it off his shoulders and gently placed it over the stranger's. "You'll freeze like that," he murmured hoarsely. "Take it." The woman looked at him with a mixture of surprise and emotion. No one had shown her such selfless kindness in a long time. She gave a faint smile and clutched the jacket to her chest, as if she found in it more than just a little warmth, human comfort in a freezing night. A few moments later, the bus arrived. Mark boarded first, politely refusing her return of the jacket. He sat at the back, silent, his body shivering, but his heart a little lighter. What he didn't know was that this woman wasn't just an ordinary passerby. Her name was Claire Dufresne. She was the new CEO of a large communications group, known for hiring only the best. And among the application files still waiting on her desk, one name kept appearing: Mark Delcourt's. This simple gesture, performed in the anonymity of a snowy bus stop, would change his destiny forever. The next morning, Mark woke up shivering. The night had been rough without his jacket, but he didn't regret it. In front of his small, chipped mirror, he tried to make his hastily ironed shirt look presentable. Today, he had a crucial appointment, another job interview, his 5th in 2 months. He took the bus, the same line as the day before. His thoughts were elsewhere, still marked by the face of the woman he had met in the cold. He wondered if she had spent the night safely. Meanwhile, in the luxurious upper floors of a large glass tower in the heart of the city, Claire Dufresne reread her diary. She had barely slept, constantly thinking about the young, unknown man who had given her his jacket. The gesture had deeply moved her. She, who lived surrounded by colleagues obsessed with their careers and their own interests, was unaccustomed to such genuineness. When her assistant came in to remind her of the day's interviews, Claire almost fell off her chair when she saw a name on the list: Mark Delcourt. The same first name, the same look she couldn't get out of her mind. What if it really was him? A shiver ran down his spine, but this time it wasn't from the cold. At the appointed time, the door to her office opened. And there, standing before her, was Mark, a little intimidated but determined. He hadn't expected to see the woman from the bus stop again in such a place. Claire gave a faint smile. She had just realized that fate had just extended an invisible thread to them. "Mr. Delcourt," she said, rising to shake his hand, "welcome to your interview." Mark, petrified, remained motionless for a moment. His eyes widened. He had just recognized the woman to whom he had given his jacket the day before. Mark sat down on the leather chair, his back straight, his hands gripping his trousers tightly. His heart was pounding. How was this possible? The freezing woman at the bus stop was his potential employer? Claire, for her part, had regained her composure. She crossed her fingers on her desk and observed him intently. Unlike the other candidates she had already met, this one didn't seem to be putting on an act. He possessed that mixture of fragility and inner strength that unsettled her. "Mr. Delcourt," she began, "I've reviewed your CV. You have strong communication and project management skills, but I'd like to know more about what sets you apart from others." Mark took a deep breath. He wanted to answer confidently, but the situation paralyzed him. His eyes rested briefly on her, and he murmured, "I don't know if I really have anything that sets me apart, except that I deeply believe in humanity. Projects, strategies, figures, all that matters, of course. But what makes the difference is people." Claire remained silent. These simple words resonated strangely with the gesture he had made the day before. She remembered the biting cold, the warmth of that jacket, and the obvious truth: this man lived what he said. She decided to test it further. "And if you had to choose," she continued, "between securing a major contract for the company or protecting a colleague in difficulty, what would you do?" Mark frowned. The answer was risky. A boss generally expected the company's interests to come first. But he chose sincerity. "I believe that if you forget about people, even to succeed in a contract, then you end up losing much more than you gain." A heavy silence fell. Mark wondered if he had just ruined his chances. But at that moment, he noticed something that troubled him even more. A discreet, almost imperceptible smile had just lit up Claire's face. She had found her answer. When Mark left the room, Claire remained motionless, her gaze fixed on the door that had just closed. She couldn't shake the impression he had made on her. Unlike most of the candidates, Mark hadn't tried to sell himself with arrogance or artifice. He had simply spoken with sincerity, the same sincerity he had shown the day before when he gave her his jacket. Seated at her desk, she twirled her pen between her fingers. On the table, a stack of immaculate CVs awaited her. Candidates laden with degrees, graduates of top schools, some recommended by influential contacts. Objectively, many seemed more qualified than Mark. But none of them had that frank look, nor that humanity that she had perceived in him. She sighed, tugged at her jacket sleeve, and her heart leaped. She realized that, beneath her luxurious coat, she was still wearing Mark's old, threadbare jacket. She hadn't had the courage to leave it in her car that morning. She had kept it, almost unconsciously, as a reminder of that rare moment when she had felt vulnerable and comforted. A discreet knock at the door made her jump. Her assistant poked her head in. "Ms. Dufresne, would you like me to schedule a second interview for Mr. Delcourt?" Claire hesitated. Part of her already knew she wanted to give him a chance. But another, more rational part feared being influenced by a personal gesture. Was it professional to favor this man because he had helped her? She put down her pen, thought for a few more seconds, then said, "Yes. Schedule a second interview. But this time, I want to see him in action." When the assistant left, Claire stood up and looked at the snow-covered city through the bay window. She murmured to herself, "Show me, Mark Delcourt, if you are really who I think you are." 2 days later, Mark was called back by the company. He was informed that he was summoned for a second interview, but this time, in an unusual format, a real-life situation. Upon arriving at the company's modern offices, he felt nervousness creeping over him. The glass walls, the immaculate offices, and the pervasive energy reminded Mark that he was out of his element. But he forced himself to take a deep breath. He had nothing left to lose. In a meeting room, Claire was waiting for him, surrounded by 2 other managers. She greeted him with impeccable professionalism, as if the jacket incident had never happened. "Mr. Delcourt," she said firmly, "we are going to give you a fictional case. You will have 3 hours to propose a communication strategy aimed at restoring the image of a company in crisis. We want to see your method, your ideas, but also how you work under pressure." Mark nodded. He was given a thick file, filled with figures, press clippings, and contradictory data. The first few minutes were a nightmare. The technical jargon, the imposed deadlines, everything seemed designed to destabilize him. But little by little, Mark remembered why he had chosen this profession, not for the numbers or the flashy campaigns, but for the ability to create connections. He jotted down ideas, organized his priorities, and crafted a presentation that emphasized authenticity, transparency, and trust. Rather than glossing over the fictional company's problems, he proposed an honest strategy focused on reconciliation with the public and empowering the employees themselves as brand ambassadors. When he finished his presentation, the two leaders exchanged astonished glances. It wasn't the most academic or ambitious solution, but it was the most humane and credible. Claire, for her part, remained silent, her eyes fixed on Mark. She now knew that her intuition had not deceived her. At the end of the session, as the others were leaving the room, she approached him and said softly, "You have a way of seeing things that reminds me of someone." Intrigued, Mark dared to ask, "Who then?" She held his gaze for a second, before replying with a mysterious smile. "A man who, the other night, preferred to shiver rather than let a stranger die of cold." Mark felt his heart stop. She had just admitted that she hadn't forgotten anything. After the test, Mark expected to be thanked politely and asked to wait for the official response as usual. However, when Claire asked him to stay in the room while the other managers left, he realized that something unusual was afoot. She gently closed the file, crossed her arms, and stared at him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Mark," she said finally, "you've demonstrated qualities I rarely look for in interviews. Most candidates know how to talk numbers, sell brilliant ideas, or impress. But you get straight to the point." He blushed, unsure whether to take it as a compliment or a negative remark. "Thank you, madam," he stammered. "I just tried to stay true to what I believe in." A slight smile appeared on her face. "And that's exactly what makes you different." Mark felt his heart beat faster. Was she going to hire him? But the sentence that followed surprised him. "However," she continued, "I am not going to give you the position you applied for." Mark's breath caught in his throat. His stomach knotted. He had hoped, he had believed, and now everything was already collapsing. Claire noticed the disappointment in his eyes, but continued. "You're worth more than just a junior position. I want to see you tested in a different way. I need a personal executive assistant. Someone trustworthy, capable of telling me the truths no one else dares to say, and of keeping their feet on the ground in this world full of ambition and pretense." Mark remained silent. He couldn't believe his ears. He, an unemployed man who had almost given up on his dreams, was being offered a position that would place him directly alongside the CEO. "I ask you to think about it," she concluded, calmly placing the old, threadbare jacket on the table between them. "But know this, in this company, diplomas open doors, but values open hearts." Mark looked at the jacket. His heart sank. This woman, whom he had helped without expecting anything in return, had just extended a hand to him that he would never have imagined. Leaving the glass building that evening, Mark walked through the snowy streets without feeling the cold. Claire's words still echoed in his head. An executive assistant position? Him? It wasn't just a promotion, it was a world completely different from the one he'd dreamed of. He stopped in front of a shop window, contemplating his reflection, a man dressed in a cheap shirt, his face marked by fatigue and hardship. Was he really up to such a demanding role? On one hand, his instinct told him to flee. He was afraid of disappointing, of making a fool of himself, of exposing his weaknesses. And then, he remembered the humiliations he had suffered in his previous jobs, when his superiors saw him as nothing more than a mere interchangeable cog in the machine. But on the other hand, a small inner voice whispered, what if this was your chance? That evening, he met up with his childhood friend, Thomas, in a small neighborhood cafe. After listening to his story, Thomas burst out laughing. Are you hesitating? Mark, do you realize what she's offering you? Hundreds of people would kill for this job. Exactly, Mark replied, lowering his voice. I'm nobody. I don't have their insurance, nor their degrees. She'll end up regretting it. Thomas placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Do you know why she chose you, Mark? Because you're different. You don't need to play a role, you're real. And believe me, in this world, that's rarer than finding $100 bill on the ground. Mark smiled faintly, but the doubt remained. On the way home, he thought again about the worn jacket Claire had left on the table. To him, it was just a tired garment. But for her, it had become a symbol. Arriving at his icy studio, Mark understood one thing: sometimes, life doesn't ask us if we're ready. It presents us with choices, and it's by accepting them that we build ourselves up. He raised his eyes to the night sky and breathed into the silence. Okay. I accept. On Monday morning, Mark once again crossed the immense thresholds of the glass tower. This time, he wasn't there for an interview, but for his first day as Claire Dufresne's executive assistant. He had spent almost the entire night, torn between excitement and apprehension. With a temporary badge around his neck, he went up to the top floor, the one reserved for management. There, the atmosphere was very different from the rest of the building: silent corridors, walls adorned with works of art, thick carpet that absorbed the sound of footsteps. Upon his arrival, a secretary with a cold stare glared at him suspiciously. "Are you the new guy?" she asked curtly. "Yes, Mark Delcourt." "Follow me." She led him to Claire's spacious office. Behind a large bay window, the director observed the city below. When she turned around, she gave a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "Welcome, Mark. I hope you're ready. Here, every second counts." Mark nodded, although he could already feel his heart pounding wildly. The day started at a breakneck pace, organizing meetings, sorting urgent emails, preparing documents for foreign investors. Mark had never worked at such a speed. Everything seemed too fast, too demanding. Several times, he thought he was going to lose his footing. But each time, Claire intervened discreetly. A reassuring look, a phrase whispered in a low voice to indicate a course of action. She seemed both demanding and attentive, testing his limits without letting him sink. At lunchtime, Mark leaned against a wall, feeling empty. That's when an elegant executive, wearing an expensive suit, approached him. "So, you're Madame Dufresne's protégé?" he said mockingly. "Protected?" "No, I'm just his new assistant," replied Mark, uncomfortably. "Oh really?" the man said, narrowing his eyes. "Interesting. We'll see how long you last here." Then he turned on his heel, leaving Mark troubled. He had just understood one essential thing: this world was not going to welcome him with open arms. When he returned to Claire's office, she noticed his distress. "Is everything all right, Mark?" she asked. I think some people don't understand why I'm here." "Don't worry," she replied in a calm but firm voice. "The biggest changes always begin with resistance. Show them who you are." Mark took a deep breath. His first day wasn't over yet, but he already knew he was in a ruthless world. And that every gesture, every word, would count. In the mid-afternoon, just as Mark was beginning to adjust to the frenetic pace of the office, an emergency erupted. The company had just been the target of a scathing article published online by an influential newspaper. The headlines were clear: "Scandal at Dufresne Communication, Exploited Employees, Broken Promises." In the corridors, the commotion immediately escalated. Telephones rang incessantly, managers rushed past, doors slammed. Mark found himself caught in the heart of a whirlwind that completely overwhelmed him. Claire entered the meeting room, followed by her managers. Mark, standing slightly apart, observed the scene. "We need an immediate statement," one of the officials exclaimed. "No, we must sue this newspaper for defamation," protested another. "If we don't respond within the hour, our image will be destroyed." Voices rose, each person aggressively defending their point of view. Claire listened, arms crossed, saying nothing. Then, her gaze fell on Mark. "And you, Mark?" she asked suddenly. "What do you think?" The room froze. All the executives turned to him with wide eyes, shocked that she dared ask the opinion of a mere assistant, who had only arrived that morning. Mark felt his heart race. Should he really speak? He took a deep breath and began to speak. "Excuse me, I'm not an expert in crisis communication, but I believe reacting too quickly would be a mistake. If we issue a defensive or aggressive statement, it will seem insincere. Instead, why not show what's really going on behind the scenes? Invite the press to meet the employees themselves, to visit our premises, to see the reality unfiltered." A heavy silence followed his proposal. Several executives exchanged disapproving glances. "That's ridiculous," one of them murmured. "Give this story even more visibility." "Total naivete," added another. But Claire never took her eyes off him. Her face, initially neutral, slowly lit up. "Interesting," she said finally. "Mark is right. Authenticity is our best weapon. We're going to organize a transparent meeting with the press. It's risky, but it's the only way to regain trust." The directors protested, but Claire made a firm decision. The decision was made. As the meeting ended, Mark sat down quietly, his hands trembling. He couldn't believe he had just influenced a company strategy on his very first day. When everyone had left, Claire approached him. She placed a brief but reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've just passed your first test," she said softly. "And believe me, it wasn't the last." Mark felt a mixture of pride and dizziness. He had plunged headfirst into a world where he wasn't supposed to belong, but perhaps he was creating it. The next morning, Mark entered the premises with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The day before, Claire had approved his idea: the press would meet the employees, visit the offices and ask all their questions, unfiltered. The journalists arrived en masse, some curious, others skeptical, armed with cameras and notebooks. The executives, used to scrutinizing every word of the press releases, were tense. All eyes were fixed on Mark, wondering if this young assistant was about to turn the situation into a fiasco. Claire spoke in front of the group, then glanced at Mark. "Show them what we really are, Mark." Mark took a deep breath. This was his moment. Every gesture, every word mattered. He guided the journalists, introduced key employees, explained the processes, and answered even the most sensitive questions honestly. He didn't try to sugarcoat the truth. On the contrary, he acknowledged past mistakes and highlighted the company's efforts to improve. On several occasions, skeptical journalists asked him pointed questions. Mark answered calmly, frankly, sometimes even with humor to lighten the mood. Gradually, the tension dissipated. The journalists began to nod, some even smiling. At the end of the visit, Claire watched in silence. She knew that the company's reputation rested on this moment, and Mark had just saved it with a simple truth and quiet confidence. "Impressive," she said when they were alone. "You held your own against seasoned professionals. Few people could have done it with such ease." Mark felt overwhelmed by emotion. For the first time, he understood that his sincerity and humanity were not weaknesses, but a strength. "Thank you, madam," he murmured. I never imagined it would work." "Sometimes the most powerful results come from the simplest ideas," she replied with a smile. "And you embody them perfectly." For the first time, Mark realized that he had found his place. Not because he had a degree or impressive experience, but because he had dared to remain himself in a world that valued appearances. A few days after the press visit, the atmosphere in the company had changed. The employees, previously tense and distrustful, were now more confident and motivated. Newspapers had published positive articles, praising the company's transparency and honesty. All this thanks to Mark, even if no one had yet officially acknowledged it. In Claire's office, Mark was putting away some documents when she entered, her elegant jacket draped over her arm. She stopped in front of him and stared at him with unusual intensity. "Mark," she said calmly, "you have exceeded all my expectations. Not only did you manage the crisis, but you did so with rare integrity." Mark lowered his eyes, a little embarrassed. "Thank you. I only did what I thought was right." She placed the jacket on the back of her chair, looking at him seriously. "That gesture yesterday at the bus stop, that was you. Your sincerity, your humanity, those are what allowed you to get this far. You just proved to me that it's possible to succeed without betraying your values." Mark felt a mixture of pride and emotion rising within him. For the first time, someone had recognized what he truly was, without artifice. "And now?" he asked softly. Claire gave a small smile, almost tender this time. "Now, you are officially my personal assistant." But more than that, you are someone I can count on, not only for work, but to understand what really matters in this company." Mark nodded, aware that his life had just changed forever. The simple gesture of giving a coat to a stranger in the cold had triggered a series of events that had opened unexpected doors for him. As he left the office that evening, Mark cast a final glance at Claire. Between them, a bond of respect and trust had just been born, founded on a shared humanity and a simple but significant gesture. The snow was falling outside again, but for Mark, the cold no longer existed. He had found his place, his destiny, and, above all, the certainty that an act of kindness could change a life, forever.